It is often awe-inspiring to consider how the smallest of decisions can change the whole course and destiny of generations. The shooting of an archduke in Sarajevo, the refusal of a black lady to move on the bus, the biting into a single piece of fruit by our first ancestors, which has led us all into the miserable little existence that we struggle with each day. We'd all quite like to have a word with some of these people, either to thank them or give them a telling off, perhaps even something a bit stronger. We had nothing to do with it, we can protest. But those decisions, those tiny acts, nonetheless affect us all for years. It's perhaps why it's so tragic that this decision, this referendum, is being made today, when we live in a society which celebrates instant gratification, where deferment and foresight are mistaken for a lack of gut. The In campaign has taken full advantage of this, of course, with talk of more expensive holidays and roaming charges. It's almost beyond parody. You can almost imagine them during the Second World War. Going to war with the Nazis will mean powdered eggs and drab fashion. Britain stronger in the Third Reich. Whether it is our decision or not doesn't matter at all. We all pay for the follies of our grandparents, and history shows the sins of the fathers are always revisited on the sons. But that's why we've got a conference here today, especially dedicated to the youth, because this isn't a decision that can be easily reversed, and it's us and our children that will have to bear the consequences the longest. However, it's the youth that I worry most about in this referendum, and I truly worry that they'll be duped not only by the most base arguments, such as not having your favourite players in your football team, but also the false compassion, the false togetherness, and the false openness which the In campaign offers. Those are the kindest of the lies, the false hopes. The most heinous, the false doubt, is that Britain is nothing on its own. Nigel said it best when he turned to Nick Clegg and said, "You just don't think we're good enough, do you?" It's akin to the worst poison poured into ears by bad and controlling boyfriends, the abusive parent that eats away at our confidence until we're scared to walk out the door. That is why, whatever happens in this referendum, whether it's the news we long for or the news we're dreading, our job is not done. The greatest problem we face is one of confidence. Young people in Britain today simply don't know anymore what it is to be British. They quite literally don't know who they are and the immense power they can unleash. Those that do are taught to be ashamed of it or hide it under a bushel. It's perhaps the greatest of paradoxes that in a culture which teaches you to be yourself, to love yourself, to be proud of your achievements, that we are taught to lack confidence in the very things that matter the most. Indeed, I've always counted myself a rebel in that respect. And so are you, which is why you're all here today. I saw what Britain was. I felt it. I knew it. And despite the pressure and suspicious looks, the nervous laughs of teachers and employers, I refused and continue to refuse to apologise for being British. Contrary to the belief that we are little Englanders, we now find ourselves as a part of a growing worldwide family of young believers who also feel the same way, who see the direction of Europe and the Western world and have decided based on the results that it is undesirable. Indeed, the words of support Young Independence receives from the Swedes, Americans, Dutch, Spanish and Kiwis is most touching. While their opponents accuse them of being fueled by hatred, small-mindedness and division, they are instead encouraged by the love they have for their fellow countrymen, the desire for unity, the love of freedom and the keeping of peace. They are encouraged by the sense that the current direction of travel in which they fight against just isn't sustainable. There can be no democracy without a demos, a group of persons with shared culture, belief and ideals, which are allegiance to each other and to the values which unite them. There is no freedom without a single shared moral code, the alternative being an increase in the size of the government to protect each person's diverse interests. The EU, even if it did ever want to attempt democracy and freedom, will always fail for that reason. There is no demos, the makeup being so terrifically diverse that a one-size-fits-all approach must be enforced by it to balance interests. They also understand that this isn't just about money. Man cannot live on bread alone. There is no ultimate happiness in a world where every place is the same, where there is a Starbucks on every street from Anchorage to Vladivostok. It is perhaps best summed up in the words of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, an Italian Catholic social activist, who said, "To live without faith, without a heritage to defend, without battling constantly for the truth, is not to live but to get along. We must never just get along." Nowhere do we see this battle more acutely displayed than in this referendum campaign. I believe it is a demonstration of the future political discourse of the West. Long gone are the days of left versus right. The battle is now between libertarianism and authoritarianism, corporatism and real capitalism, communitarian globalism and democratic nation states. It's between utilitarianism and heart, those that price and those that value, those that want the demos and democracy and those that want to eradicate both. It's between the bribed and the loyal. It's a battle between the cynical and those who still believe. Far from being small-minded, therefore, we see this campaign in the context of the wider world. We should never underestimate how many look to us as a beacon and standing bearer for democracy and freedom, a benchmark by which others compare themselves. On a trip to Sri Lanka's northern province, I was amazed to hear the outpouring of admiration from people for British democracy. Indeed, Nelson Mandela himself held our parliament to be the best in the world. A recent email from the chairman of Young New Zealand First, New Zealand's answer to UKIP, told us to carry on the fight for Brexit, that we were, I quote, doing God's work. If only we had as much faith in ourselves as those people have in us. Make no mistake that if we get out of this corporatist dictatorship, others in Europe will follow. And far from being isolating, we stand in solidarity with the young across Europe. Many of us have lived through a recession in this country. We got through it with the mantra of keep calm and carry on. Just get any job for now. Batten down the hatches, it will be over soon. Imagine being a young person in Greece with employment rates of nearly 50%, Spain 45%, Italy 40%. Imagine knowing there are no little jobs for you to get on by with, that you're on the scrap heap, a price worth paying to keep the project alive. How any of these sneering middle-class children on the BBC debate on Thursday can so gleefully cheer for an organisation which imposes these conditions for the sake of vested interests, false absolutes and ideology. How any decent human being can celebrate that disgraceful withdrawal of the dignity of labour from so many of their fellow young people will always be beyond me. As someone that studied architecture, one subgenre of building I most enjoy studying were those built in the 1960s by newly independent states. The ambition, sometimes misguided, but nonetheless youthful and optimistic, comes through every time. The best example, if you care to see it, are the Parliament buildings in Dhaka, Bangladesh, by architect Louis Kahn. There is something about that particular era in a country's history which breathes so much hope and energy. It's a place for the young, those that want to control their own destiny and see nothing stopping them, their elders quietly smiling, knowing that while they have a lot to learn, they will at least have fun doing it in a way they never could. The spirit of independence is the very spirit of youth, and we hope on the 24th of June we'll be celebrating our own Independence Day. I'll end on this. There's an interesting Google search that you can do. It's, what are the newest countries in the world? Currently, the newest is South Sudan, which broke free from the greater part of the Sudan following decades of civil war. The next are Serbia and Montenegro, two countries that were themselves locked in a union, which kept a forced peace before disintegrating into one of the worst conflicts this continent has seen for decades. We have East Timor, a state whose independence referendum result was ignored before the UN had to step in. And we have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, two countries which said, no hard feelings, but it's time to call it a day. Over the rest of today and the next few weeks, let's do all we can to add another country to that list. Let's make Britain the youngest country in the world. Thank you.